The hum of cheap fluorescent lights buzzed above the checkout lanes. The faint smell of reheated pizza drifted from the small store cafe, mixing with a detergent-like scent of freshly mopped floors. A line of tired shoppers stretched back past a magazine rack, each one clutching their groceries with the same quiet impatience. The sound of beeping scanners punctuated the stale air like a metronome. At the front of the line, a young mother fumbled with her wallet. Her son, barely 4, tugged at her sleeve, asking if they could take home the colorful cereal box he had picked out. She smiled softly, though it was the kind of smile that concealed exhaustion rather than joy. The cashier, a young man with a lopsided name tag that read Jake, leaned against the counter, chewing gum lazily. His vest was wrinkled, his shirt untucked, and his expression wore permanent boredom. "Come on, lady," Jake muttered under his breath, loud enough for those behind the counter to hear. The woman swiped her worn credit card once, then twice. Declined. Jake rolled his eyes dramatically, his voice now carrying across the line. "Maybe you should try a real card. These old things don't work in the mall." A few chuckles rippled through the line. A teenager 2 carts back let out a loud laugh. The woman's cheeks flushed scarlet. She muttered an apology and tried again, her hands trembling as her son clung tighter to her sleeve. What nobody noticed, not yet, was the man 3 spot behind her. He stood quietly, wearing a plain polo shirt, faded jeans, and a weathered navy cap. His stubble suggested someone who hadn't bothered much with appearances. But his eyes, sharp, steady, unwavering, watched every detail. He balanced a paper coffee cup loosely in his hand. David had seen this before. He'd seen disrespect disguised as humor, arrogant parading as customer service. He knew how far small cruelties like this spread through a business, poisoning it from the inside out. But hey, in this store, it wasn't just another observation. It was personal, because David wasn't just another tired customer. He was the owner, and today, he was undercover. The line crawled forward, each beep of the scanner carrying tension. At last, the mother's card went through, and she hurried away, clutching her groceries, whispering thanks to no one in particular. Jake smirked, shaking his head as though her struggle had been an inconvenience to him personally. Next up was a frail elderly man. His hands shook as he tried to lift 2 heavy bags of dog food onto the belt. Jake didn't move to help. Instead, he leaned back further, tapping his fingers on the counter, eyes half closed as though the entire transaction bored him to death. "So," Jake said flatly, "if you can't lift it, maybe don't buy it." The old man froze, his lips pressed tight, shame flooding his features. A woman in line stepped forward quickly, offering her strength and hoisting the bags onto the belt for him. She gave Jake a glare, but Jake only shrugged. David watched, jaw tightening. He had been undercover for weeks now, but every day revealed something uglier. Laziness, mockery, indifference to the people who made the store what it was. And the managers? They turned a blind eye. At the far end of the store, David's eyes caught another figure. A faded diner uniform clung to a woman with dark hair tied back. She was stocking shelves with quiet determination, sweat forming along her brow. Her name tag read Rachel. Rachel wasn't just another worker. She was a story in herself. 2 kids at home, a second job at night, and yet she carried herself with a kind of resilient grace, offering smiles to customers, covering shifts no one else wanted. David had overheard the way other staff dumped the worst tasks on her because they knew she wouldn't complain. It reminded him of something his father once told him. The true measure of leadership is how the smallest voices are treated when no one's watching. And today, David was watching. The shift dragged on. David purchased a few items here and there just to stay unnoticed, drifting from aisle to aisle, listening, observing. He saw Anthony, a cook in the cafe corner, wiping sweat from his forehead as he flipped burgers on a grill that hissed angrily. The fryer oil hadn't been changed in days. David could smell it from across the store. When Anthony asked the manager for a fresh batch, she brushed him off with a sharp glare. "Do your job, Anthony. Customers don't care about oil." But they did care. David could see it in their expressions, hear the complaints whispered under their breath as they pushed half-eaten food trays aside. Anthony caught David's eyes briefly, offering a tired, almost apologetic smile. Then there was Mark, the thin-framed dishwasher with hollow cheeks. He stood at the back of the cafe, hunched over a mountain of dirty plates, scrubbing with relentless speed. No one noticed him. No one thanked him. Yet without him, the cafe would drown in filth within the hour. David lingered long enough to hear Mark cough into his sleeve, pushing himself despite the strain. The more David saw, the more his chest burned, not with anger, but with disappointment. This store wasn't failing because of money, location, or competition. It was failing because of people, those who mocked, those who ignored, those who treated others as less. And at the center of it all was Tom, the smug shift supervisor. Slick back hair, clipboard in hand, lips curled in a permanent smirk. He strutted through the aisles like he owned the place, barking at employees, smiling only when corporate names were mentioned. David followed him discreetly, listening. "You," Tom snapped at Rachel. "Stack faster. We've got an inspection next week. And don't think about overtime. We're not paying you extra." Rachel bit her lip but nodded. "Yes, sir." Tom smirked. "Good girl." David's grip tightened around his coffee cup. Hours passed. Jake continued his sarcastic commentary at the checkout lane, rolling his eyes at customers, sighing loudly at those who fumbled for coupons, tossing change onto the counter instead of handing it politely. David noticed every detail. By closing time, tension hung in the air like humidity before a storm. The final straw came when another customer approached Tom at the service desk, a woman in a wheelchair, asking for help reaching an item on the top shelf. Tom didn't move. He didn't even glance up from his clipboard. "Ask one of the floor staff," he muttered. "I'm busy." The woman's face fell. Rachel, who had been restocking near the desk, immediately rushed over, retrieving the item and placing it gently into the customer's cart. She smiled warmly, whispering, "Don't worry, we've got you." The woman's eyes welled with gratitude. Tom never even looked up. Jake, watching from the register, snorted under his breath, muttering, "All this drama over a box of crackers." That was it. David had seen enough. He stepped forward, placing his half-empty coffee cup on the counter with a deliberate thud. The sound made Tom glance up, annoyed. Jake, too, leaned on his counter, arms crossed, eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Can I help you?" Tom asked, his tone dripping with impatience. David's eyes locked on his. Sharp, unwavering. "You already have," David said slowly, "more than you realize." The smirk on Tom's face faltered. Around them, employees began to notice. Rachel froze mid-step. Anthony peered out from the cafe corner. Mark's head poked out from the back. Jake, gum still in his mouth, snorted. "Who even are you?" Jake asked with a chuckle. "Some nosy shopper who thinks he runs a place." David straightened, his voice carrying across the store. "I've spent weeks watching how this place is run. I've seen kindness buried under cruelty. Hard work is overlooked while laziness is rewarded. Customers mocked, employees exploited, and all of it happening under your so-called supervision." Tom scoffed. "You don't know what you're talking about." David reached up, pulling the worn Navy cap from his head. His expression hardened. "My name is David. I'm the owner of this chain." The store went silent. Jake's gum nearly fell out of his mouth. Rachel's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. Even Mark stood frozen, dishwater dripping from his hands. Tom's face paled. "Why, you're the—" David cut him off. "The one signing your checks. And I've seen enough to know this store is rotting from the inside." Jake muttered, voice low but shaky now. "Oh, crap." What happened next would change everything. Jobs, policies, futures. But for Jake, Tom, and the rest who had treated customers and staff with contempt, the reckoning had just begun. David leaned forward, lowering his voice, but his words carried more weight than any shout could. "You mocked customers for struggling. You dismissed employees who carried this place on their backs. And you thought no one was watching." Jake swallowed hard, shifting his weight, suddenly very aware of the quiet in the room. "Well," David continued, "I was watching, and tomorrow the real changes begin." The staff held their breath, caught between fear and hope. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she held onto the cereal box she had been restocking. Anthony wiped his brow, unsure whether to smile or brace for the worst. David's gaze swept across all of them, his eyes softening slightly when they met Rachel's. Good people will be rewarded. Bad actors will be held accountable. His words lingered, heavy, final, and then he walked away, leaving the staff in stunned silence. The camera of imagination would fade to black hair, leaving the audience perched on the edge of their seats. The confrontation had only begun. Tomorrow would bring firings, promotions, new rules, and the true test of whether justice could heal the wounds of a poisoned workplace. But tonight, the staff went home with the echo of David's words in their minds. For some, fear. For others, hope. And for viewers listening now, a reminder. True leadership isn't measured by power or by profit margins. It's measured by how we treat those who have the least power, whether we choose to mock weakness or lift it. Because in the end, empathy is the strongest currency we have. Everyday interactions, at a checkout counter, a service desk, or behind a cafe grill, hold the power to break someone or build them up. Humility means never thinking we're above another person. Empathy means recognizing the hidden battles others are fighting. Leadership means standing up when silence is easier. When we forget these truths, we create workplaces built on fear and cruelty. But when we live them, when we choose kindness over mockery, we don't just change a store, we change lives. The cafe smelled faintly of burnt toast and strong coffee. Morning light poured in through the wide front windows, cutting across empty tables that still carried the echoes of last night's rush. Plates stacked high near the sink. The grill hissed faintly as it heated. The staff trickled in slowly, their faces pale and tired, bracing themselves for another day. At the corner booth, David sat waiting. Same plain polo shirt, same jeans. The same worn navy cap is now resting on the table. But there was something different in the air, an invisible shift in authority. Even without a uniform, even without a badge, there was weight in the way he sat today. Rachel, Anthony, and Mark exchanged wary glances as they passed him. Rachel, David said, his voice calm but firm. Anthony, Mark, could I speak to you for a few minutes? The three froze. Jake, leaning against the counter with a soda in hand, raised his brow. Oh, somebody's in trouble. He smirked, his gums snapping between his teeth. Rachel's cheeks flushed red, but David only shook his head. His eyes stayed on hers. No, quite the opposite. Rachel approached hesitantly, clutching her apron ties like they were the only thing holding her together. She sat across from David, the sunlight hitting her weary face. David leaned forward slightly. You handled yourself well yesterday. Rachel blinked. What do you mean? The customer at the checkout. The card issue. His tone was steady, but his words cut straight to the memory she tried to bury. Her shoulders stiffened. I just didn't want to make a scene. You didn't, David replied, but you didn't deserve to be treated that way either. His eyes flicked briefly toward Jake at the counter. Rachel's lips trembled. It happens a lot. Customers. Sometimes even co-workers. Jake pretended to sip his soda, his ears burning. David's voice softened. You're raising a child, working double shifts, and still showing up here every morning. Do you know how much strength that takes? Rachel's eyes welled. She quickly looked away, wiping them with the back of her hand. I don't feel strong. I feel tired, like I'm failing at everything, at work, at home, like I'm invisible. You're not invisible, David said firmly. Not anymore. For the first time in weeks, Rachel's lips curled into a faint, fragile smile. Next, Anthony slid into the booth, arms folded across his stained apron. He looked suspicious, guarded. What's this about? He asked. David stuttered him. You covered 2 stations yesterday. You gave up your own break. Why? Anthony shrugged, eyes narrowing. Because if I don't, customers wait longer. They get mad. Then Rachel takes the heat. And she doesn't deserve that. You do that often. Anthony smirked bitterly. Only every day. Management doesn't notice. Or maybe they do, and they just don't care. Easy to pile more work on the one guy who won't say no. David nodded slowly. And yet you keep showing up. Because somebody has to, Anthony said simply. And because I can't afford to lose this job. Not with the bills I've got. David leaned back. Anthony, you're holding this cafe together more than you realize. For the first time, Anthony's tough facade cracked. He gave a short laugh, shaking his head. You're the first person who's ever said that. Mark was the last to sit, his hands damp from dishwater, his eyes cast down. His wiry frame seemed to shrink into the booth. I saw you stay after your shift yesterday, David said. You scrubbed every pan, every corner. Why? Mark's voice was barely above a whisper. Because if I don't, it won't get done, and then everyone else pays for it. And no one thanks you. Mark shook his head. Doesn't matter. I'm just a dishwasher. People don't even remember my name. David's expression hardened, his voice rising slightly. It matters. Every dish, every plate, every cup. You're the reason this place doesn't fall apart. You're not just anything. Mark, you're essential. Mark froze. His throat worked as if swallowing back something heavy. He nodded once, unable to speak. From behind the counter, Jake shifted uneasily. He'd been pretending not to listen, but the words carried. His smirk was gone now, his soda can crushed slightly in his hand. Who was this man? Why was he talking to them like he knew them? Why was he lifting up the workers that everyone else overlooked? Jake didn't like it. Not one bit. The cafe door swung open. Tom, the supervisor, strutted in with his clipboard under his arm. His tie hung loose, his shirt wrinkled, but his arrogance was intact. All right, people, let's get moving, he barked. Anthony, grills behind. Mark, those dishes aren't sparkling. Rachel, tighten up, you look sloppy already. Rachel winced. Anthony clenched his jaw. Mark hunched lower. David didn't move. He simply watched. Tom finally noticed him sitting in the booth. And you are? David smiled faintly. A customer. Watching. Tom scoffed. Well, you can watch from outside, pal. We've got work to do. But before David could respond, Jake piped up nervously. Tom, maybe leave him be. His been around. Tom shot Jake a look. Since when do you care who sits where? Jake swallowed, his smirk gone entirely. He had no answer. Through the morning, David stayed. He watched the cafe run. He saw how Tom nitpicked Rachel for smiling wrong. How he berated Anthony for moving too slow. He told Mark that anyone could do dishes while ignoring Jake, who spent more time on his phone than at the register. But every time Tom barked, David noticed something else. Rachel, Anthony, and Mark carried themselves just a little taller than before. Because someone finally saw them. Someone finally told them they mattered. And Jake carried himself smaller. He fumbled with change, snapped gum nervously, glanced toward David with growing paranoia. The walls were closing in, and he could feel it. When the rush finally eased, David stood. His voice cut across the cafe, calm but commanding. Tom, he said, we need to talk. The supervisor blinked, then laughed. You need to talk to me? About what? Customer complaints? I get them all the time. Comes with a job. David stepped closer. His presence filled the room. No, not customer complaints. Employee complaints. The cafe fell silent. Rachel froze mid-step. Anthony set down his spatula. Mark turned off the sink. Jake's jaw dropped. Tom scoffed again, but his laugh wavered this time. What are you, some kind of secret shopper? David's lips curved into the faintest smile. Something like that. Jake's face drained a color. By the time Tom followed David reluctantly into the office, every eye in the cafe was fixed on the booth where he had sat today. Rachel's heart pounded. Anthony's fist tightened. Mark held his breath. And Jake wiped his palms on his vest, gum losing its flavor as dread settled in. He had mocked the wrong customer. And now that man was pulling the supervisor into a private meeting. His day of reckoning wasn't here yet, but he could feel it coming. It's easy to overlook the quiet workers. The single mother is trying to make ends meet. The cook who carries everyone else's weight. The dishwasher keeps the whole operation alive. It's easy to mock, to sneer, to shrug off their worth. But true strength lives in their resilience. And true leadership means seeing what others choose to ignore, lifting the invisible, shining a light on the overlooked. David knew this, and soon the entire cafe, Jake included, would know it too. The office door creaked as Tom pushed it open, his clipboard clutched like a shield. The space was small, 2 chairs, a battered desk, filing cabinets that hummed faintly from the cheap overhead light. The air smelled of old paper and stale coffee. David stepped inside slowly, his hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't sit right away. He just stood, looking at the walls, the dusty plaques, the corkboard of memos no one read. Tom cleared his throat. Look, if this is about service issues, I've got it covered. Customers complain all the time. It's part of the business. You can't take it too seriously. David finally sat, folding his hands on the desk. His voice was calm. It's not about customers, Tom. It's about how you treat your people. Tom blinked, caught off guard. My people? You mean my employees? They are fine. They know the rules. If they can't handle a little tough love, they're in the wrong job. David's eyes hardened. Is that what you call it? Tough love? Rachel hovered near the cafe door, tray in hand but frozen. Anthony leaned against the counter, arms crossed, jaw tight. Mark had stopped at the sink, straining to hear through the thin walls. And Jake paced by the register, running his tongue along his teeth nervously. He tried to laugh it off. You guys really think Clipboard Tom's in trouble? Please. He's untouchable. The guy's been here forever. But no one responded. Their attention was fixed on the closed office door. The air buzzed with tension. David leaned forward, his voice quiet but sharp. Yesterday, I saw you berate Rachel for not smiling enough. I saw you order Anthony around like he was a machine. I saw you dismiss Mark as just a dishwasher. Do you know what that does to people? Tom scoffed. They're employees. It's their job to do what I say. David's eyes didn't waver. No, it's their job to do the work. It's your job to lead. And you're failing. Tom's face reddened. Now wait just a second. Who do you think you are? Some kind of secret shopper? Some corporate auditor? Because if you are, I should be the one talking to you about conditions here. We're underfunded, understaffed, and I'm the one holding it together. David let the silence stretch. Then he spoke softly, each word deliberate. If holding it together means breaking your people down, then maybe you shouldn't be holding anything at all. Tom swallowed. His bravado faltered, just for a moment. Back outside, Jake tapped his soda can against the counter, harder and harder. His gum lost all flavor. He muttered under his breath, "This is stupid." Tom will set him straight. No way some random guy just walks in and starts. But deep down, Jake felt it. That gnawing unease. The same unease he'd felt when David's eyes locked on him the day before, when David had said, "Not yet. Your time will come." Jake's stomach twisted. Tom tried to recover his footing. "Look, you don't understand how this place works. These people, you give them an inch, they take a mile. You've got to be firm." David rose from his chair, his presence filling the small office. "No, Tom, I do understand how this place works. Better than anyone, because I built it." The words hung heavy in the air. Tom blinked. "You built it? What are you talking about?" David leaned closer. His voice dropped low. "Dangerous. I'm not a secret shopper. I'm not a customer. I'm the man who signs your paychecks. I'm the owner of this company." Tom's mouth fell open. The clipboard slipped from his hands and clattered against the desk. Outside, Rachel gasped. Anthony's brows shot up. Mark froze, dish rag dripping into the sink. Even Jake's knees buckled slightly. He steadied himself against the counter, muttering, "No, no way. His bluffing. Has to be." But the conviction in David's voice had shaken them all. Tom stammered, "Why you can't just walk in here like this? No one said the owner was coming. No announcements. No." David cut him off. "That's the point, Tom. When leaders announce themselves, people put on a show. But when you're undercover, you see the truth. And what I've seen in this store is unacceptable." Tom's face paled. He sank into the chair. "Look, it's not always like that. They exaggerate. You know how employees are." David's voice thundered now. I don't need their word. I saw it with my own eyes, and I will not allow people like you to poison what I built. Jake's hand shook as he stacked receipts at the register. He muttered to himself, "It's fine. Tom's the one in the hot seat, not me. He doesn't even remember the card thing. It's fine. It's fine." But his reflection in the register glass betrayed him, sweat beading on his forehead, lips pressed tight. He wasn't fine. Not at all. Because if David was really the owner, then every word Jake had ever sneered at a customer was now a nail in his own coffin. Back inside, David straightened his shoulders. "Here's what's going to happen, Tom. You're going to step aside. Effective immediately, you are no longer in charge of this cafe." Tom's jaw dropped. "You can't do that." "I can," David said coldly. "And I just did." The words landed like a hammer. Tom slumped back, defeated. The fight drained out of him. David turned toward the door, his voice carrying so everyone could hear. From this moment forward, things change. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, this time not from humiliation, but from relief. Anthony clenched his fist in victory. Mark let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Jake, however, looked like the walls were closing in. He wiped sweat from his brow, fumbling to find his smirk again, but it wouldn't come. Because if Tom, the untouchable supervisor, had just fallen, then Jake knew his own day of reckoning was drawing near. David stepped out of the office, his presence electrifying the cafe. He scanned the room, his gaze pausing on each face: Rachel, Anthony, Mark, and finally Jake. Jake froze, caught in the intensity of that stare. David's voice was calm, almost casual. "Some of you deserve recognition. Others deserve answers. And a few," his eyes locked on Jake, "will have to explain themselves very soon." The cafe fell silent. Jake's throat went dry. His smirk was gone for good. Leadership is not about power. It's not about clipboards or titles. It's about people, their dignity, their worth, their lives outside the walls of the workplace. When leaders forget that, when they belittle instead of build, they don't just fail their workers, they fail themselves. True leadership is measured not by how loudly you command, but by how deeply you care. And as David left that office, one truth was clear: this cafe would never be the same again. The cafe was still buzzing from Tom's collapse. His clipboard lay abandoned on the counter, a silent trophy of his downfall. For the first time in years, Rachel, Anthony, and Mark allowed themselves to breathe. But there was one person who couldn't breathe: Jake. He stood behind the register, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, tapping his fingers against the countertop like a drummer out of rhythm. Sweat beaded at his temple. He adjusted his vest, straightened his name tag, and forced a smile that wouldn't stick. And then David turned. The man in the navy cap, who had already stripped Tom of his authority, locked eyes with Jake. The room went quiet, as though the very walls were waiting for what came next. "Jake," David said calmly, "we need to talk." The words hit Jake like a stone to the chest. His smirk faltered completely. Every step Jake took toward the cafe tables felt like sinking deeper into quicksand. His sneakers squeaked against the linoleum. His throat was dry, and he swallowed hard, forcing a laugh that no one echoed. Look, boss," he said, voice cracking. "I don't know what Tom told you, but is always exaggerating. He doesn't like me much, so—" David cut him off. "This isn't about Tom." Jake froze halfway to the table. "Then, what's this about?" David's gaze sharpened. "It's about the way you treat people." Rachel set down her tray and crossed her arms. Her son had endured Jake's mocking tone before, when they couldn't afford more than the cheapest cereal. Anthony leaned against the counter, arms folded, his jaw tight. Mark wiped his hands on a rag, silent but attentive. They all knew. They had all seen. And now, Jake had nowhere to hide. "Do you remember yesterday, Jake?" David asked, voice steady. Jake forced a shrug. "Yesterday? Sure. Busy shift. A lot of customers. Nothing out of the ordinary." David leaned forward, his words like glass. A young mother, tired, struggling. Her credit card wouldn't swipe. "Do you remember her?" Jake's throat bobbed. "I mean, kinda. Customers have card issues all the time. It's not my fault. David's tone hardened. You mocked her, out loud, in front of a line of people. You humiliated her. Jake's face burned. He tried to laugh, but it came out thin and brittle. Hey, come on. It was just a joke. Everyone jokes. Customers don't take it seriously. Rachel's voice cut sharply. She took it seriously. Jake whipped his head toward her. Surprised, she spoke up. Rachel's eyes burned with something more than anger, something personal. My son was standing right there, she said, her voice trembling but firm. He watched her face turn red. He saw her hand shake. And he asked me later why the man at the counter was mean to her. The cafe was silent. Jake's smile died completely. Look, I didn't mean, Jake started, but Anthony stepped in. Didn't mean what? You say stuff like that all the time. You sneer at customers. You roll your eyes at Rachel when she's hustling 3 tables at once. You act like you're better than the rest of us. Jake bristled. I'm not better, okay? I don't know. I get bored. I mess around. It's just words. People are too sensitive these days. David's voice dropped low, slicing through the tension. Words matter, Jake. They can wound deeper than fists. And yesterday, your words told that woman she was less than you, less than everyone in line, that she wasn't good enough to stand there with dignity. Jake's chest rose and fell rapidly. He glanced at Mark, desperate for backup, but Mark only shook his head. You laughed when I slipped on the wet floor. I could have cracked my skull, and you just laughed. Jake opened his mouth, then shut it. Okay. Jake blurted, his voice cracking now. I'm sorry, all right? I didn't mean it. I was just stressed. Tom's always on me, and the shifts are long, and customers are rude, and... David cut him off with a single, piercing question. And what excuse do you think that mother gave her son last night when he asked why the cashier laughed at her? Jake froze. His lips trembled, but no words came out. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Anthony exhaled heavily. Mark's head dropped, unable to look at Jake anymore. Jake, David said slowly, you think you're safe behind that counter. That no one notices. But I've been watching you. The smirks, the sarcasm, the way you puff yourself up by cutting others down. Jake shook his head wildly. I wasn't. I don't. Yes, you did. David snapped, voice sharp as steel. I saw it, with my own eyes. Jake's heart pounded in his ears. He felt like a bug pinned under glass. The narrator's voice drifted in like a slow echo, cutting through the silence. Jake thought his words were harmless. A joke here, a sneer there, but every smirk left a scar. Every insult left a bruise. And in places like this cafe, where people worked long hours just to survive, those wounds never healed. Images flashed in the viewers' minds. Rachel, clutching a tray, swallowed tears after Jake mocked her tired face. Anthony was scraping pans while Jake called him the grease guy. Mark was cleaning dishes while Jake muttered, "You'll never do better than this, man." The cruelty wasn't loud. It wasn't violent, but it was constant, and it was crushing. Jake's bravado was shattered. His shoulders slumped, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think it mattered," he said, eyes darting between them. "I thought people forgot about it after. I didn't think." David's voice thundered. It mattered to her. It mattered to every person who walked out of here feeling smaller because of you. It mattered to this team, who endured your attitude day after day. Jake's face was pale, his hands trembling. His mask had finally cracked. David stood tall, his presence looming over Jake. "Here's the truth. This cafe is changing. Tom's gone. The days of cruelty are over. And people like you," his eyes drilled into Jake, "will not be part of the future we build." Jake's knees buckled. He stammered, Wait, you can't just fire me. I need this job. I'll do better, I swear. Just give me another chance." Rachel's voice came from the side, soft but resolute. She needed another chance, Jake. And you laughed at her. Jake's words died in his throat. David delivered the final blow. "Effective immediately, you're done here. Leave your vest. Leave your name tag, and leave with the knowledge that every choice has a consequence. The cafe was utterly still. Jake's trembling fingers unclipped his vest. He dropped it on the counter with a hollow thud. His name tag clattered to the floor, face down. For once, Jake had nothing to say. He walked out slowly, head down, shoulders heavy, not with pride, but with shame. The door closed behind him, and the weight lifted from the room. Rachel wiped her eyes. Anthony let out a laugh, not mocking, but relieved. Mark stood taller, almost proud. David looked at them, his expression softening. From now on, this cafe belongs to you too. Your voices matter. Your dignity matters. And anyone who forgets that will answer to me. Rachel nodded, a faint smile breaking through her tears. Anthony grinned, clapping Mark on the back. For the first time in a long time, hope lingered in the air. Every workplace tells a story. Sometimes it's written in paychecks and policies, but more often, it's written in how people treat one another, in the small moments, the words spoken when no one important seems to be listening. Jake thought no one noticed. He thought his jokes vanished in the air. But every word left a mark, every smirk left a memory. Respect is not optional. Empathy is not weakness. And leadership is not about being feared. It's about being remembered for lifting others higher. David knew it. And now, so did everyone in that cafe. Because in the end, people may forget the transactions, but they will never forget how you made them feel. The door closed behind Jake with a hollow thud, and for the first time in years, the cafe was quiet, not with tension, but with relief. His vest lay abandoned on the counter, the name tag glinting under the fluorescent light like a relic of a past they would no longer tolerate. Rachel exhaled a shaky breath. Anthony rubbed his hands together, a grin breaking across his tired face. Mark just stood there, silent, as if trying to process it was finally real. Tom was gone, Jake was gone, and the cafe they had endured for so long was finally free. David remained still for a moment, his navy cap shadowing his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm, carrying a gravity that held the room together. "This place belongs to you now," he said. "Not to clipboards, not to smirks, to you." Rachel swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing for now," David replied gently. "Just breathe. You've earned that much." Over the next few days, the cafe didn't just feel different. It sounded different. The sharp bark of Tom's orders was gone. The constant mutter of Jake's sarcasm had vanished. In its place was laughter, hesitant at first, then freer, warmer. Rachel moved between tables with a lighter step. Customers noticed her smile, not forced, not rehearsed, but real. Her son sometimes sat in the corner booth while she worked, drawing pictures with crayons. And for the first time, she didn't fear that someone would use her child's presence against her. Anthony worked the kitchen like an artist now, humming while he flipped burgers, the smell of seasoned fries drifting out into the cafe. He didn't just cook. He took pride in his food, plating it with care. Mark washed dishes with rhythm, tapping his foot to an old tune, not weighed down by ridicule anymore. He started talking more, cracking small jokes with Anthony, and even suggesting new ways to keep the kitchen running smoothly. And David? He stayed, not as a silent man in the navy cap anymore, but as a leader who walked among them, sleeves rolled up, willing to get his hands dainty. One quiet morning, David called them together around a table. He placed 3 envelopes on the surface, sliding them across. Rachel frowned, confused. "What's this?" "Recognition," David said simply, "for work that's been ignored for too long." Rachel opened Hayes first. Inside was a letter and a check, more money than she'd seen in years. Her eyes widened. This can cover rent for 2 months. David smiled softly. "It should cover more than that. You've held this place together in ways no paycheck ever reflected. Consider it the first of many changes." Anthony opened his next. His jaw dropped when he saw the raise reflected in his new contract. "This can't be real," he muttered. "I've been begging for a $1 raise for years." "It's real," David assured him, "because your skill deserves it. This cafe needs cooks who care about the food. And you've cared, even when no one else did." Mark hesitated to open his. His hands trembled. But when he unfolded the letter, his face broke into the widest smile Rachel had ever seen. "You're promoting me to kitchen lead." "You earned it," David said firmly. "You've been more than a dishwasher for years, Mark. Now the title matches the work." Mark's eyes watered. He wiped them quickly, embarrassed, but Rachel patted his back. "You deserve it," she whispered. But David didn't stop with personal recognition. He gathered the entire cafe staff, new hires, old hands, even the janitor who worked nights. They met in the back room, where David stood in front of the dusty corkboard and ripped down the old memos Tom had pinned up. "These rules," David said, holding them up, "were about control, not care. They're gone. From now on, here's how we operate." He pinned new papers to the board. No employee works more than 8 hours without a break. Schedules will be posted 2 weeks in advance to allow families to plan. Customer respect goes both ways. Staff are not punching bags, and leadership will stand behind them. Raises and promotions will be considered quarterly, based on merit, not favoritism. The room buzzed with cautious hope. Rachel caught Anthony's eye and smiled. Mark gripped the back of a chair like he was holding on to something too good to be real. David looked at them all, his voice steady. "This cafe will be a place of dignity. If anyone tries to take that away, whether a manager, a coworker, or even me, you speak up, and you will be heard." Later that evening, when the cafe had quieted, Rachel approached David. Her son clutched a hand, a crayon drawing folded in his pocket. "Why us?" Rachel asked softly. "Why did you choose to care? Most bosses don't." David looked at her, his expression tender but firm. "Because I've been where you are. My mother worked nights in a diner just like this. She came home tired, her feet swollen, her smile forced. People treated her like she was invisible. I swore that if I ever had the power to change that story for someone else, I would." Rachel's throat tightened. She blinked back tears and nodded. Her son tugged on David's sleeve, offering the crayon drawing. "I drew you," he said shyly. David unfolded it. The picture was simple but clear, a man in a cap standing tall in a cafe, surrounded by smiling workers. David's heart swelled. "Thank you," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "This means more than you know." Anthony found his confidence again. He began experimenting with recipes, creating specials that drew in regulars. Customers came not just to eat, but to taste his food. For once, he felt seen not as the cook but as a craftsman. Mark took his promotion seriously. He started mentoring the new hires, teaching them the tricks of the kitchen, and encouraging them when they struggled. He spoke more, laughed more, and even began saving for community college classes. The cafe thrived, not because of flashy renovations or corporate gimmicks, but because its people finally felt valued. On the last night before he had to return to corporate headquarters, David gathered Rachel, Anthony, and Mark one final time. They sat in the quiet cafe, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. David removed his cap, setting it on the table. His eyes were tired but kind. "You've seen what happens when leadership forgets the people who make it all possible," he said. "But you've also seen what happens when dignity is restored. This cafe isn't perfect yet. It won't be, not overnight. But it's a start, and it will stand as proof that respect is not optional. Not here, not ever again." Rachel nodded, her hand over her son's. Anthony smiled proudly, arms folded. Mark straightened his shoulders, determination in his eyes. David placed his cap back on, stood, and said, "Take care of this place. Take care of each other. That's how we win." Workplaces are not just places of labor. They are stages where dignity is tested, where humanity is either honored or ignored. Tom thought power meant control. Jake thought words were harmless. Both were wrong. Real leadership is not about titles or authority. It's about the lives you touch, the families you help sustain, the dignity you protect. Rachel, Anthony, and Mark carried scars from neglect and ridicule. But given the chance, they bloomed. Their resilience became the backbone of a better future. The lesson is simple, yet profound. Never underestimate the impact of kindness. Never excuse the cost of cruelty. And never forget that true leadership begins with listening. Because in the end, people may forget your rules, your policies, your profits, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And in that cafe, on that ordinary street, a new story had begun, one of hope, justice, and the quiet power of empathy. The end